I thought shit, but I didn't show any sign of alarm as I continued chatting with Nathan the bartender. Having returned to Texas just 6 months ago after a 3-year absence, I wondered how she managed to track me down and, more importantly, why she was looking for me. Without turning around or acknowledging him, I was in the midst of delivering a risque joke when I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Mr. Hartman," a voice called out. Startled, I slightly raised an eyebrow at Nathan, silently warning the newcomer named Nick Carter. "Do you want to keep that hand, Nick?" I quipped. Feeling his hand retreat, I turned back to Nathan, sharing the punchline before he chuckled and handed me another drink. As Nathan chuckled and walked away, Nick insisted on discussing business with me. Interrupting my conversation, he said to me, "My name is not Hartman, and unless you're looking to hire me for welding services, we have no reason to converse." Before collapsing to the ground, that was all he managed to get out. I placed $20 on the counter, rubbing my sore hand, gestured goodbye to Nathan, and prepared to depart. "Mr. Hartman, you are elusive, and I have no desire to restart my search for you," I declared, gazing at the taser gun pointed in my direction by the fallen man. Despite his supine position, the sight was still quite menacing. As he rose to his feet, he wiped blood from his lip. "I won't hesitate to use this," he warned, "so sit down and let's talk." I signaled to Nathan, who was approaching, gesturing for him to stay back. After a moment of consideration, he acquiesced and walked away. "Let me know if you need anything, Jack," Nathan offered. "Thank you, Nathan." "I will," I replied before turning my attention back to the taser-wielding individual. I chuckled softly and leaned in. "Do I know you, young man? Who carries a taser in Texas?" "Excuse me, Mr. Hartman, but I must say your manners could use some improvement. It seems like you may not have been raised in Texas. How about we start fresh? You can call me Jack and then let me know what you need." "Jack, right?" "Okay, Jack. Let's get Nathan to set us up with a couple of beers and put it on Nick's tab." With a smile, I took a seat at the nearest booth and inquired, "So what's the deal with this Hartman character that has you all riled up?" "All right, Jack, let's go with your style, at least for now. Mr. Evan Hartman, a successful and wealthy Dallas businessman, vanished without a trace just over 3 years ago. He is married to a Mrs. Lila Hartman, and they have a daughter named Clara, who is 23 years old. My name is Nick Carter, and I've been tasked with locating Evan Hartman and returning him to Dallas. Intriguing, isn't it? So how does that relate to me? It seems you may have mistaken me for someone else, as I am neither Evan Hartman nor a prosperous businessman. I go by Jack Brown, and I work as a welder for a living who traveled aimlessly, playing the guitar poorly and trying to start fresh. Before embarking on this journey, I invested a significant sum in establishing a new identity. Along the way, I transformed my appearance by growing out my hair and beard, shedding excess weight, and building muscle. These changes were so drastic that even someone as familiar as Leela wouldn't be able to recognize me. Leaving behind all my possessions in Dallas, including a lucrative job, multiple properties, vehicles, credit cards, keys, and even my unfaithful wife, I took only cash with me. After settling in a new location, I secured a trailer for lease, signed up for a welding course at a local college, and started rebuilding my life. Without any credit cards or a cell phone, I worked off the books for cash, moving frequently and only staying in one place for a few months at a time. My only luxury was a second-hand Ford F-150 truck, purchased under my new identity, and a used but exquisite Martin Dreadnought guitar that I bought from a music store after filing my tax return and generally staying out of trouble. I knew I couldn't completely cut Clara out of my life. Approximately 15 or 16 months after I left, I decided to send her an email to confirm that I was alive. With each subsequent move, I made sure to send her another email from a public library computer, expressing my love for her and letting her know she was always on my mind. I chose not to divulge my whereabouts or the reasons for my departure, ignoring her inquiries on those subjects. I figured she could extract that information from her mother. Jack interrupted by calling my name, but I continued. Just over 3 years ago, Mr. Hartman disappeared without a trace, leaving everyone clueless about his whereabouts. Initially, the police didn't seem to investigate his disappearance thoroughly. There were speculations that he may have left with another woman or that Mrs. Hartman could have been involved in some sort of foul play. It was a tough year for Mrs. Hartman personally, professionally, and financially as she tried to sell off some of their assets. But I didn't have a power of attorney and couldn't get Mr. Hartman declared dead, so she was stuck. There was money in the bank, but few new funds coming in, so she went through those rather quickly. She hired a lawyer to help her get her husband declared dead. Unfortunately for Mrs. Hartman, about 16 months after her husband's disappearance, their daughter Clara received an email from someone claiming to be Mr. Hartman. Of course, the daughter was elated, but it made having Mr. Hartman declared deceased a difficult proposition at that point. The police closed the case, and Mrs. Hartman hired my firm to find one Mr. Evan Hartman and bring him back to Dallas to face charges of fraud and enable Mrs. Hartman to secure sole access and control to the marital assets. Poor dear, she sounds in a pickle. So tell me, Nick, how do I fit into this little made-for-TV movie? Well, Mr. Hartman, may I call you Evan? You can call me Jack like everyone else. I am authorized by the state. Texas may need to ensure your presence for questioning regarding allegations of fraud and abandonment. Evan Hartman, by escorting you to the Dallas County Sheriff, even if it requires force. I chuckled openly, irritating him. Quite a mouthful for someone so small, isn't it? Nick, your tale is amusing, but what specific fraudulent activity has supposedly taken place? Since when did walking away from a difficult marriage become a criminal offense in Texas? And why would the Dallas County Sheriff bother with such matters? That just doesn't seem plausible. Nick, I would suggest that if you do manage to locate this Evan Hartman, you might want to consider refining your threats. He appears to be quite savvy. It's doubtful that persuading him to return to Dallas would be an easy feat, especially if he left abruptly for a good reason. Allow me to assist you with a hypothetical scenario, Nick. Why should he return? What would motivate him to do so? It seems evident that you'll need to delve extensively into these questions for a compelling response. After finishing my beer and taking a sip, I remarked, "You can put away that laser pointer." Nick, I racked the slide on my Glock, making sure to grab Nick's attention. His face paled as he realized the danger of the loaded 9mm pointed at him, and he carefully placed his taser on the table where I had indicated. Let me share a story with you, Nick. I began with a casual tone. A friend of mine told me this tale about 3 years ago. Are you ready to listen? I called out to Nathan, requesting more drinks and a basket of wings for the table. Nick's tab is on the company, by the way. So the story goes like this. There was a man named Evan, who was married to a woman named Leila, and they had a daughter named Clara. This is the account that Evan shared with me. He described the moment he knew his marriage was over, a pivotal moment that occurred during Leila's 50th birthday celebration at their weekend home in the countryside. Leila, always a reserved woman, had shown no interest in. At our family gatherings and lavish events, we are fortunate to be well off, and as a result, my wife had everything she desired and needed. This made finding the perfect gift challenging. I dedicated months to contemplating the ideal present for her, subtly gauging her preferences through conversations and seeking input from her friends. Ultimately, I was content with the gifts I chose. However, when my wife saw them, a fleeting disappointment flashed across her face before she composed herself and thanked me with forced appreciation. Having been married for 24 years, I believed I knew her well, but it was evident she had anticipated something different. I pondered on this revelation and eventually mustered the courage to inquire about her true feelings. Although she initially insisted she was content, her smile seemed strained. Upon further probing, she admitted that the gifts did not align with her expectations. She had envisioned something a bit different, although she couldn't quite articulate what that might be. It became apparent that she harbored some uncertainty and disappointment all was about to find out. I apologized for ruining such an important moment for her and promised to make it right. She expressed surprise that her 50th birthday didn't receive more thoughtfulness from me. I attempted to explain why I chose each gift, but the more I spoke, the more frustrated she seemed, I vowed to make amends, but she pointed out that if I had truly considered her in the first place, there would be no need to make things right. The situation left me wondering how to rectify such a mistake, knowing that turning 50 only happens once. As I mentioned feeling unwell and wanting to return to Dallas, we rode home in tense silence. Our relationship had faced challenges before, including Lila's infidelity during my college years, which nearly prevented our marriage. I encountered a tall, elderly man who warmly hugged Lila. After Lila had introduced us, he shook my hand with a smirk that immediately put me on guard. His handshake was weak, a trait my father always warned me to be cautious about. I took an instant dislike to him as a result. When he asked if he was a friend of Lila's father, I felt something was off, but couldn't quite pinpoint it. Later that day, I noticed Lila seemed flustered, and he acted smug while she was at work. Upon investigating, I discovered they had been in a relationship for about a month, evident from the love letters I stumbled upon. Despite her denial when confronted, claiming they were just friends, I decided to walk away without looking back. Ignoring her attempts to communicate, I discarded her letters unread and disconnected from her and her friends. My friends called me, pleading her case. I told them all to tell her she needn't worry, that she was free to screw and marry her grandpa. Now I hate being lied to. Ultimately, she came to see me and over time managed to convince me to give her a second chance. I did. But I kept her on a very short leash for a very long time and told her in no uncertain terms that if she ever cheated on me again, we were through. 2 years later, we married. She never did admit to the cheating. After 11 years of marriage, Lila threatened to divorce me. I was drinking too much, working too much, traveling too much, and she was no longer interested in sharing her life with me. We argued. I told her that while I could not curb my travel, I could cut back on work a little and certainly would rein in my drinking. I begged her to think of our young daughter, Clara. She eventually agreed, but I was saddled with some pretty severe restrictions, and she set about separating our finances and lives. She told me he was simply getting ready for what was to come. I expressed my frustration that she appeared disinterested in the work, but she merely shrugged and left the room. Despite this, I remained steadfast, and with time she started to loosen up. I believe this change occurred mainly because I began earning significantly more than her. In fact, the amount I paid in taxes surpassed her yearly earnings. Maintaining separate finances proved advantageous for me as it allowed me to explore my own interests without having to consult her. I indulged in purchasing motorcycles, a sizable sailboat, flying lessons, and a Cessna. I dressed in designer suits, drove a recent model BMW, and acquired a second home in the countryside, a 50-acre weekend retreat, all without any financial assistance from her. I prioritized contributing to our household finances, covering family vacations, and yet, it seemed like she wanted a larger share of my life. Consequently, she began to relax. However, I am uncertain if we ever fully moved past that particular period. 2 years ago, I had nearly reached a breaking point. After years of increasing conflict with Lila, I decided to end our marriage. Our relationship had deteriorated to the point where she treated me like an employee, and any intimacy we shared felt more like a routine than a genuine connection. Suspecting that she had been unfaithful during her work travels, I confronted her and gave her an ultimatum. Either we make an effort to strengthen our relationship with better communication and intimacy, or we separate. Tired of living in a loveless marriage, I served her with divorce papers to initiate a serious conversation. Despite days of arguing, she eventually agreed to consider our options. For the first time in years, we truly connected. To my surprise, she expressed that she didn't want a divorce and promised to reconnect. Despite my initial skepticism, believing it was mainly about money, I eventually agreed to give it another try out of love for her. We established new rules for our communication and engagement, and embarked on the journey to mend our marriage. I took the lead, pushing for progress, while she appeared content to go along. However, I often felt like I was the one doing all the heavy lifting, with her passively observing from the back seat like a passenger in driving Miss Daisy. After a year, I asked her to take a more active role in steering our relationship, but she remained reluctant to do so. Despite her own list of grievances, I listened attentively, acknowledged her concerns, and made efforts to address each one. Although she rarely initiated efforts to improve our relationship, my love for her kept me motivated to work on our marriage. She actively participated in my suggestions, which led to improvements in our relationship. Our communication improved, and we were enjoying more fulfilling and frequent intimate moments, sometimes even twice a week. Although she was not as sexually adventurous as before, she was willing to try new things and seemed content. I felt more at ease as we found satisfaction in our relationship, but I couldn't ignore that she seemed to be holding back. After her 50th birthday, the warmth between us started to fade. She attributed it to work stress and assured me that things would go back to normal once her schedule eased up, but it never did. While she had always worked long hours during projects, I began to notice that her late nights were becoming more frequent, and I found myself spending more weekends alone at our country home. I had a plausible excuse, but decided to wait it out a bit longer. Over the next 6 weeks, we only engaged in sexual activity twice. Both instances were at my insistence. However, on both occasions, it seemed like she was merely tolerating my advances. After one particularly unenthusiastic lovemaking session, she simply rolled over to sleep. Another time, she abruptly left the room. During evenings and weekends, she made every effort to avoid me. When avoidance was not possible, she appeared bored or irritated. This behavior reminded me of a previous pattern. Her unpleasant side was resurfacing. In the last 2 years, we had worked on communicating any issues before they escalated into major conflicts. We aimed to have productive discussions, considering each other's perspectives and working towards resolutions. We were committed to addressing problems head-on and not resorting to excuses or non-participation. I addressed the concerns of the aggrieved party and attempted to focus solely on resolving those issues. When discussing her schedule, lack of affection, and our non-existent sex life with her, she showed no interest in finding a resolution. Despite my attempts to initiate conversations over a couple of days, she repeatedly brushed me off. I emphasized the importance of following our agreed-upon rules of engagement in communication, but she responded dismissively, telling me to leave her alone and disregarding the significance of those rules. I remained composed despite my building anger, and through gritted teeth, I reiterated the importance of our mutual agreement. Her response, telling me to deal with my frustrations on my own, was crystal clear. The question of whether she was being unfaithful arose in my mind, although I chose not to pursue it further. While Texas law may not assign fault in divorce proceedings, I still desired clarity. It appeared evident that our marriage was beyond repair, regardless of any potential infidelity. However, being deceived weighed heavily on me, and this time, there would be consequences for her actions. I had always stressed the value of honesty and loyalty in our relationship, and I would not let her betrayal go unnoticed. I told her that if she was so attracted to someone else that she couldn't resist screwing them, we would divorce first. I would be hurt, but I would respect her for respecting me enough to wait until we were divorced and being honest with me. We could part amicably, sort of, and I promised to do the same for her. I had to know for certain, and I had things to do. Before we had recombined our finances some 8 years earlier, I had siphoned some of my cash to an investment account. I had also arranged with my employer to have all of my bonuses deposited in that new account. I never told my wife about this, mostly because she wanted to control our finances, and I thought I could do a better job investing than she could. It turned out I was right, and my investment portfolio was now very healthy. One of the benefits offered by my long-term employer was tax preparation, and my wife and I never agreed on filing services. 13 years ago, at her insistence, we started filing our taxes separately, a decision she saw no need to change. Suspecting she may be hiding money, I secretly maintained an investment account from her. My plan was to surprise her with the funds for our retirement, assuming we reached that point. In the event of a divorce, my intention was to divide our assets fairly. However, if she was being unfaithful, I was determined to protect my investment. I strategized on gaining control over our joint accounts, selling our Dallas property, and securing our beloved country estate where we planned to retire. I didn't want to lose that property to her or be forced to sell it, but if necessary, I would take action to maintain ownership before considering allowing her to take it. I had invested in, maintained, and provided for it for a decade. In my view, she had no inherent right to it. Although I was tempted to give her the house in Dallas because of her attachment to it, I was hesitant to do so if it meant losing my own country home. Anticipating a potentially contentious situation, I wasted no time and sought advice from a legal expert. I reached out to an old college friend who was a corporate lawyer in Dallas, and we discussed my predicament over dinner and drinks. His counsel was stark. My prospects did not look favorable. If I proceeded with a divorce, safeguarding my assets would be challenging. Splitting assets without using legal means is not advisable. Instead, you may want to consider seeking legal advice on how to proceed with dividing assets in a fair and legal manner. It is important to approach any divorce or separation situation with integrity and respect for all parties involved. If there are suspicions of infidelity, it is best to address them openly and honestly within the legal framework. Consulting a specialized family lawyer can provide guidance on how to navigate the situation effectively and responsibly to avoid any confrontation. I decided to no longer inquire about her schedule, our weekends, our sex life, or the lack of intimacy between us. She seemed to interpret this change as a victory, believing that I had simply accepted the new circumstances. I started spending the majority of my time at our country home, seldom crossing paths with her, which appeared to please her. Seeking guidance from my new divorce lawyer, I proceeded to update the beneficiaries on my will and insurance policies with her assistance. She also advised me to consider hiring a private investigator, emphasizing that Texas operates under no-fault laws. She pointed out that having concrete visual evidence could be influential in negotiations. Recognizing the value of this suggestion, I agreed. The lawyer recommended an ex-cop who ran a reputable agency that she had utilized successfully in the past. She arranged for me to meet with him that very afternoon, where I opted for the deluxe package to have our activities monitored through audio and video recordings. In a short span of time, the investigation team was able to uncover crucial details, such as the individuals involved, timing, and duration of events. They immediately began work on obtaining the necessary video evidence to support my case. Realized that it might assist me in a divorce situation. A week later, I found myself watching video evidence and was unexpectedly devastated, causing me to push aside any backup plans. The sexual aspect of the situation seemed unremarkable to me. The other man involved was not particularly better endowed or in better physical shape than I am, nor did he appear to have superior techniques or ability to pleasure my partner. It became apparent that my partner had not engaged in any new activities with him that she had not done with me previously. However, he took the liberty to insult me verbally, and she eagerly joined in, even suggesting they engage in intimacy in our bed next time, which they did. It was he who proposed cutting off my sexual connection with her in the first place. Interestingly, the idea of me being intimate with her after he had been turned out to excite him, and even my partner, Leila. I felt a sense of emptiness as I began to question if I truly knew this woman. Observing and learning about your spouse's infidelity can be a painful experience. Dealing with the aftermath of discovering your spouse cheating and leaving the marriage are quite different animals. I had no fight left in me. I had the video evidence sealed and gave it to my lawyer for safekeeping, with instructions that it be given to my daughter in the event of my death. I prepaid Clara's college tuition through graduation from our joint savings account and then liquidated my investment account. I would live on what I had from my investment account, and it would last me for years without being frugal. And now our joint savings account was severely depleted. 2 weeks later, I looked around the house one last time, sighed, and made peace with my decision. I left my keys, cell phone, and wallet on the desk in our foyer where I always left them. I took off my wedding ring and dropped it on the pillow of what was my side of the bed. Let her wonder about that. Then I left. I didn't speak with anyone. I didn't leave any letters. I walked out the front door without even bothering to close it. Walked around the corner and got in my new pick. I hopped out of the pickup truck and drove away. 2 weeks later, a 40-something married man and father of 3 was mugged and savagely beaten coming out of a Motel 6. What a cheap prick. He would walk again, not for a while, and even then with a pronounced limp. A month after the mugging, his wife received a FedEx package with a video showing her husband with a woman who appeared to be in her early 50s. I understand that a year later they were divorced, and he was broke. After I left, I drove aimlessly for 3 days. I didn't really have a plan. I ended up stopping in a small town for lunch one day and decided I'd stay for a while. I found a small community college offering classes in welding and enrolled. Why not? After 12 months, I managed to find work welding for an auto body shop. I only had a year of welding classes, so I couldn't get a real welding gig, but found lots of people willing to hire a guy for cash since it was a lot cheaper than a certified welder. And most welders weren't interested in it. I took on various small tasks and found satisfaction in my work for another 4 months before deciding it was time for a change. I spent the next 2 years traveling around the country, occasionally stopping in small towns to engage in intimate encounters and do some welding. It was a period of enjoyment and fulfillment, a stark contrast to the years of dissatisfaction I had experienced in my job in Dallas. Despite the excellent pay and my natural talent for the work, the daily grind felt draining. I persevered for the sake of my family, particularly for Lila's expectations and Clara's deserving nature. Lila valued the financial stability, allowing her to work for a non-profit organization for a modest salary, assisting those in need. However, the reality behind the facade was different. The organization primarily consisted of affluent wives seeking purpose and recognition. Their fundraising events were merely for show, covered by local media, and the extravagant attire of the staff members outshone the hard-earned wages of many in the community. It was a disheartening situation. Most of the funds raised through the charity event went towards supporting future charitable endeavors, providing a sense of fulfillment for those involved. On the other hand, I dedicated myself to a job I disliked to meet societal expectations and support my family. Following my departure, I made a conscious decision to prioritize my own well-being. Over the years, I engaged in casual relationships, prioritizing my own satisfaction while also hoping for mutual enjoyment. I was focused on personal fulfillment rather than seeking a long-term commitment. Moving forward, my focus remains on self-care and independence. While uncertain about the outcomes for Lila, our property, and our shared history, I am content with the decisions made and respect her chosen path. While harboring some negative feelings, I choose to live without dwelling on the past. Despite these emotions, I hold a glimmer of hope for a potential reunion with my daughter in the future. If she can promise not to let Lila know, so far she is having a difficult time making that promise. I keep hoping. As I understand it, Nick, my friend, is happy now. He left a cheating bitch and a miserable job behind and doesn't give his wife a spit of thought. Why would he go back so she can screw him over and make him miserable again? That just doesn't make any sense to me. He's happy, healthy, and wealthy in all the areas that matter. His wife and his marriage to her made him miserable, but when he finally woke up and gave up, he realized the only two good things that came out of it were his daughter and eventually his freedom. He finally realized that he was the only one in the marriage, really. His wife brought her whole and nothing else. You know, he told me that after he left and sampled a few other women, he came to realize that even the whole she brought wasn't all that good. He knew in retrospect that she never, not once, brought her a game to the relationship. She played him for 24 years. That just doesn't sound like anything worth staying for or going back to. Hey Kev, how about a couple more beers here? He told me he felt his wife was a card-carrying narcissist, and so he figured the cruelest thing he could do to her is pay no attention to her. He didn't want her to see his pain so she could feed on it and feel like she mattered because of it. Indifference was the key that would kill her. But how could he be around her and be indifferent? He decided if he just left everything, he would be telling her not only was he indifferent about her, but about their entire life together. He figured it might take years, but she would eventually falter and fail, and in that, he would win. Nick sighed, nodded. You're an interesting character, Jack. And that's a good story. Where's your buddy these days? I shrugged my shoulders. Who the hell knows, Nick? Getting laid and welding something somewhere. Definitely not working his bum off for an ungrateful. It seems like Evan may be in Wisconsin, a place he always wanted to visit. He's likely content wherever he is. Have you considered the option of Mrs. Hartman filing for divorce due to abandonment? This could provide her with control over the marital assets she desires. This might be a straightforward solution to her problem and could alleviate the need to continue searching for Evan. Unfortunately, Mrs. Hartman's attempts to file for abandonment failed due to her initial declaration of him being deceased. As a result, she lost the house, the country property, and her job. It appears she couldn't sustain the properties on her own and eventually faced foreclosure. They are some kind of metal arts consulting company. Mrs. Hartman lost her job when it was discovered she was having an affair with a married employee. Wow, she sure does have a niche, don't she, Nick? He nodded. Well, I sure am sorry I wasted your time, Jack, but I did almost enjoy meeting you. He fished $40 out of his wallet, threw it on the table, rose, and extended his hand to me. No hard feelings. None, I said, but you should be more careful who you upset in the future. You're lucky I'm such a patient guy. He laughed as he turned to go. He took about 6 steps before stopping, and without turning he asked Jack. Yes. For what it's worth, Lila still loves him. She's sorry and had hoped to get him back. She is depressed, drinks too much, and is not doing well. Women like her don't really know what love is, Nick. They love themselves and they love the things other people provide for them. They are users and are incapable of tea. Expressing concern for others, it is disappointing to see individuals exhibiting greed and selfishness, causing harm to those around them. Instead of feeling remorse, some individuals continue to engage in hurtful behavior, prioritizing their own interests over the well-being of others. It is important for them to consider the consequences of their actions on their loved ones, such as their daughter's emotional well-being and the impact on their spouse. Perhaps it would be best for them to reflect on their choices and strive for a more responsible, loving, and honest approach. Ultimately, it seems that a healthier and more considerate environment is deserved by the husband and daughter in this situation. As the scene shifted, Evan acknowledged Bob and discussed the possibility of relocating Nova Enterprises' office to Wisconsin, where Clara has a deep love for the snowy winters directed towards Everett. Bob expressed his gratitude. There is a possibility that they might succeed. To provide further clarity, Mega LLC belonged to Evan. After a few weeks, Clara finally reunited with her father. Meanwhile, Lila continues her quest to locate her missing husband Evan or his assets, whichever she can track down first. We encourage our listeners to share their feedback in the comments section, and remember to like, share, and subscribe.